Welcome to your Get That Nugget for GCSE English Language. Today we'll be concentrating on giving you a framework to answer Paper 1, Question 4, the evaluation question. This session is to complement your lessons with your teachers and not to replace them in any way. To begin, we're going to revisit the aims of Question 4. You may be familiar with these already, but we're just going to go through them for the purposes of the video. We need to show the examiner that we have these skills. We need to show that we can evaluate the effects of whatever the writer has used on the reader. Really importantly, that we remember it's about the effects. We need to also show we have an understanding of writers' methods, so any techniques they may have used and what those effects are. And then finally, we need to make sure that we are responding to the focus of the statement in the question. It's really important to remember that this is not just a language analysis question. We have to evaluate what the writer has used and why they have been used by exploring the effects on the reader. The question 4 will use all of your skills from question 2 and question 3, and it is a 20-mark question. So it's worth a quarter of the marks on this paper. It's a really important question, and it's a really good question to get the skills right for. It makes a massive difference in your end result. And it's also quite a nice question. You will evaluate things in life without even realising it. Every time you watch a film, a football match, a TV show, you will be evaluating players' skills or characters or how you've enjoyed the story by making a comment on whether you liked it or whether you didn't like it and why. You are already evaluating without even realising it. In this case, it's just with the text instead. So as long as you're using the skill of evaluating, you will be able to get those marks. So in an exam, the question will look something like this. So you will be given a section of the text to look at and then a statement. The statement is really important because that's our question focus. And then you will be asked, to what extent do you agree? So if we break the question down, so our first approach to this question, our first step, is we need to make sure we know exactly where we are looking for in the text. If we're looking in the wrong section or not quite a large enough section, you will struggle to find anything to write about. So it's really important that you know exactly where you are looking. Use a highlighter, make sure it's really clear for you. The next step is you need to make sure you know what the focus is. So in this case, we have to read the statement and find those key words. It's really important that we find those key words in order to be able to answer the question. So a student having read this extract stated, this extract really builds tension and you can really feel how scared the man is. So now we know that when we go back to the text and we look in those specific lines or that specific section, we are looking for anything that builds the tension, anything that shows how scared the man is. So that's the first stage of this question. We know exactly what we are looking for. The next step that you need to do is you need to go back to your text. Now, for the purposes of this video, we are looking at the monkey's paw, which is what we've looked at for all the videos, and you are able to download this and work through should you wish. So we know that we are working from line 8 down. This is where your highlighter comes into play again. What you're going to need to do is you're going to need to section off that bit of text. So you don't go outside that box. You know everything you're going to look at is within that box that you've highlighted. It just makes your work quicker. It also means that your focus is never away from that box and you don't get tempted to look somewhere else outside of the section they've given you. Next is your really important part of the question. This is where you need to go through and find anything that links with that question. Now, obviously, we don't have enough time in the video to go through all of this text and find things, but I'm going to do a few with you so that you can see what the approach is. This is probably the 3rd or 4th time that you have read this text, and that's fine, doesn't matter. It's not a waste of time. It's really important that you do read it. And the more familiar you are with the text, the better your response is going to be anyway. But as you read, remember the key parts of the question, and that's exactly what you're looking for. You are looking for anything that builds tension, anything that shows how scared the man is. So if we go to this section, we should be able to find a few things that show that he is scared. And as I said, I'm only going to do a few of them and I'll show you the process. So you read it through line by line as you normally would, and you start again to highlight anything that you could possibly link to that question. So what I've highlighted already shows that he is really scared. It's building that tension because we're not really sure what he's afraid of. And I've already managed to find a few things that I can talk about later in my answer. What I would then do, so after I've highlighted, what I then need to do is I need to annotate what I have found. Because by the time I get to the bottom of the text, I might have forgotten why I've even highlighted that. And that wastes precious time for you in the exam. So I need to remember that I'm looking for methods as well as effects. So if he watched it fearfully, we've got an adverb there. He sank trembling, we've got a verb there. He's chilled with cold, so that phrase shows that he's full of fear. The idea that he's glancing occasionally, so that adverb shows he can't fully look. Already here, I have a semantic field. And it's a semantic field of fear. Now, you might be quite lucky because if you remember on video 2, this was actually our language section and we had to look at how the characters are shown to be afraid anyway. So I would have probably already had that annotated. And in some papers, you do get that lucky, you do get similar questions. But for the purposes of this, if this was a brand new text, that's the process. The first thing is read the question and the question focus. The second thing is go through and highlight, and then you are annotating those things. Okay? So I know that I've got my method. I'm happy with that. I also know what kind of things it's creating. But what I haven't done yet is evaluated it. How does that show that this statement is correct or that I agree with that statement? Well, I would agree with the statement at the moment because yes, I have found evidence to show that he is scared. So I would just make a little note to myself to say that here I agree with the statement. So when I come to write my answer later, it's going to be very easy for me to be able to write a paragraph about how I agree with the statement. If you want to take that a step further, I would advise that you add a few more bits of detail into your analysis. So at the moment, we've gone quite basic. We've talked about what techniques they are. We've talked about the basic effects of these. But obviously, we're going for those higher marks. So we should add a little bit more annotation to what we've done. So I've said it's semantic field of fear. Fine. Quite a simple thing to say. But how does that really build tension? Well, the idea is that it builds tension because we're not really aware of what he's afraid of. There's almost an idea of withholding information here because we're not quite sure what he's scared of. He's not quite forthcoming about what might happen next. He actually doesn't know what happens next or what's coming. So I know that by the time I've gone down to here on the text, I already know that I've planned almost my first paragraph, and all I would then do is in my answer, I would just take all of these things, all of my notes, and turn them into full sentences. The writing of the answer is going to take less time really than the planning of it. If your plan is detailed, the writing shouldn't take that long at all. As I said, it's a 20-mark question, so you're going to be spending at least 20 minutes on this answer, and every minute counts. So if you spend a good 10 minutes planning, then your 10 minutes writing time should be much easier for you to do, and you should be able to get as much in there as possible. If we just recap the steps, so the first thing we do is we make sure, obviously we read the question, we know where we're looking, and we also find those key phrases or those key words in the question to know what our focus is. The next thing we do is we draw a box around the section of the text that we want to look at. Really important to make sure you don't go outside of those lines. The final step is as you're reading, you're going to highlight anything to do with that question focus and then annotate why you've highlighted it. Give yourself the explanation that you're going to need later. Remember, the focus is what's the writer used and the effects that that creates. I would also recommend, as I mentioned, to just make yourself a little note of whether you agree or disagree with a statement by the evidence you found. Sometimes it will be agree, sometimes it will be a disagree. Usually it's a partially agree, so you'll have a variation of ideas, but we'll go through that in the next video when you construct an answer. If you repeat this all the way through, you will have a really good plan to answer this question. I'm going to leave you with a question to practice so that you can show your teacher. This question is from the extract Rebecca, which is uploaded for you to have a look at. Remember those 3 steps. First step, you're going to find where you're looking. You're going to find those keywords in the question. Second step, you're going to read the text, and then you're going to highlight and annotate anything that links to the key parts of your question. If you do that and give it to your teacher, I'm sure they'll be really happy to see your process and how you attempt this question. Welcome to your Get That Nugget for GCSE English Language. Today we'll be concentrating on giving you a framework to answer Paper 1, Question 4, the evaluation question. This session is to complement your lessons with your teachers and not to replace them in any way. To begin, we're going to revisit the aims of Question 4. You may be familiar with these already, but we're just going to go through them for the purposes of the video. We need to show the examiner that we have these skills. We need to show that we can evaluate the effects of whatever the writer has used on the reader. Really importantly, that we remember it's about the effects. We need to also show we have an understanding of writers' methods, so any techniques they may have used and what those effects are. And then finally, we need to make sure that we are responding to the focus of the statement in the question. It's really important to remember that this is not just a language analysis question. We have to evaluate what the writer has used and why they have been used by exploring the effects on the reader. The question 4 will use all of your skills from question 2 and question 3, and it is a 20-mark question. So it's worth 1/4 of the marks on this paper. It's a really important question, and it's a really good question